Hello and welcome back to this third and final video in our three-part video series on trauma and regulation. Once again, my name is Brianna McEnany and I'm an occupational therapy doctoral student, and I'm very excited to present our final topic, emotional and behavioral regulation. In this video, we will review the connecting and correcting principles of TBRI, examine why some youth have difficulty regulating their behaviors and emotions, and explore some specific strategies we can use to help improve emotional and behavioral regulation in those who have suffered trauma. So, let's begin with a review. If you remember from the previous videos of this series, TBRI, or Trust-Based Relational Intervention, is a common approach to trauma-informed care that is often used in the foster care system. The previous video on sensory regulation covered the empowering principle and examined how sensory approaches can impact the fight, flight, and freeze reaction in the body. After reducing this reaction, there's the opportunity to form connections and begin changing behavioral responses of foster youth using the connecting and correcting principles. The connecting principle is where we teach youth in our care that their emotional needs matter by responding to their nonverbal cues and encouraging eye contact. This is also where we begin teaching emotion-based language. Meanwhile, the correcting principle is a way to teach self-regulation strategies, proactive regulation strategies, and reactive regulation strategies. Before we get into using emotional language or teaching self-regulation strategies, let's review the reactive behavioral intervention, the ideal approach. If you remember from the first video of this series, the ideal approach stands for the immediate, direct, efficient, and action-based responses that are leveled at a youth's behavior and not the youth themselves. This approach is broken down into 4 levels, depending on the severity of behavior present. These levels are playful engagement, structured engagement, calming engagement, and protective engagement. Playful engagement is used in instances of verbal disrespect or a low-level behavioral challenge. In this level, the caregiver strives to redirect the youth to perform an appropriate redo of a behavior after the caregiver reminds or models the correct, respectful response. A structured engagement is used during instances of direct verbal challenge when a youth is not willing to perform a redo and is not redirectable. In this level, you offer a forced choice where the youth will get their desired outcome only if they're able to perform a redo and ask respectfully or politely for what they desire. A calming engagement is used when there's a risk of the situation elevating with the youth's behavior. At this level, it is important to encourage time-ins, giving the youth a space to compose themselves. Time-ins are different from time-outs and are not meant as punishment, but rather as a way for the youth to compose themselves and to regroup. As these are not punishments, the caregiver or adult should always remain close by in case the youth needs something or desires to talk. The final level of the ideal approaches is protective engagement. Protective engagement is used when a youth is no longer in control of their actions. The goal of this level is to keep everyone safe. This includes yourself, the foster youth, and any bystanders that may be in the environment. Once the youth has had time to compose themselves, direct any reactions to their loss of control at their behavior. It is important not to blame the youth for their actions. A specific proactive response strategy will be covered at the end of this video. So now that we've had a brief refresher for the TBRI principles and explored some of the ideal approaches and ideal levels, let's look at some of the causes of emotional and behavioral regulation difficulties in foster youth. Think back to the previous videos where we learned that regulation is part of the brain's higher functions, and that these functions are limited by previous traumatic experiences. Trauma interrupts the development of the prefrontal cortex and can disrupt a youth's development of their emotional regulation and critical thinking skills. Trauma can also reduce a youth's ability to recognize and differentiate between threatening and non-threatening situations, as well as reducing their ability to identify physical and mental cues relating to their emotions. This can become a problem if a youth is not able to tell what they are feeling. This can often lead to inappropriate emotional expressions. For example, you could have a youth who lashes out and screams at you, who insists that they aren't actually angry. They're sad or tired, despite all evidence to the contrary. This is because some youth are not able to identify what they may be feeling at all. Difficulty with emotion recognition and appropriate expression can impact the youth's ability to socialize and form relationships with their peers and caregivers, adequately express their emotional state to others, and control their behavioral reactions when exposed to extreme or even typical emotions. So, what are some strategies that we can use to help these youth reconnect to their emotions? One approach is known as the zones of regulation. The zones of regulation is a cognitive behavioral approach developed for the school system that has been adapted for use in therapy clinics and home environments. The zones of regulation strives to teach youth how to consciously regulate their emotions and behaviors using lessons on emotional recognition, social interactions, and specific coping strategies to improve self-regulation. The zones of regulation is broken down into 4 different zones, which are determined by the level of arousal that a student or youth may be feeling. There's the blue zone, which is low arousal, the green zone, which is adequate or typical arousal, the yellow zone, which is slightly elevated arousal, and the red zone, which is arousal as high as it will go. The blue zone is used to describe when a youth is feeling slow and low arousal. The feelings often used within the blue zone are feelings of sadness, tiredness, being sick, feeling shy, feeling uncertain, or hurt or bored. Youth are in the blue zone are sluggish and lack energy, and it may be difficult for them to participate in their daily lives just because they don't see a purpose, or they just don't have the energy to do so. The green zone is considered the just right zone. Youth in this zone feel all right. They're often feeling good, calm, happy, relaxed, or focused. Youth in this zone are considered to be ready to learn or just ready for the day. The goal of the green zone is to remain in the green zone for as much as possible throughout the day, especially when in school or interacting with others. The yellow zone, youth are considered to be going a little bit too fast. Their arousal is slightly up, and they may be feeling excited, silly, frustrated, annoyed, nervous, scared, jealous, maybe even uncomfortable. This is a zone of slightly heightened emotions and anxiety. Youth in this zone may need help to utilize strategies to help them calm down. In the red zone, youth are speeding at about 110 miles an hour. They're incredibly heightened arousal. This is a zone where their behaviors are considered to be out of control. Youth in this zone may be feeling elated, terrified, mean, angry. This is also where you'll see things such as physical aggression, verbal aggression towards their peers. While it's important to remember that both the red and yellow zones are considered to be heightened arousal and where the youth is going too fast, what differentiates them from each other is the level of control that a youth has. A youth in the yellow zone will still have some control over their emotions, while those in the red zone have grown outside. Their emotions have grown outside of their ability to regulate. So knowing a little bit about what the different zones are and how the different amounts of arousal is impacted by them, how can we use the zones to teach and improve emotional awareness? First, we can use strategies from the zones to teach and improve the emotional vocabulary of the youth in our care. By using proper or more complex names for emotions, using words like frustrated, shy, calm, and angry, instead of just basic phrases such as happy, sad, or angry, we show youth that there are a large range of different emotions. We also show them that it's okay to feel these emotions, so long as they're expressed in an appropriate fashion. Another important strategy from the zones of regulation is encouraging the youth to be aware of their body language. By encouraging a youth to pay attention to the physical cues of their emotions, such as feeling tense when they're upset, or feeling jittery and energetic if they're too excited, can help the youth respond better to their emotions. This strategy is very similar to the final strategy, and is basically using the zones of regulations to be aware of the social cues of those around us. As the youth learns their own physical cues for their emotions, they can also begin to learn the social cues of the emotions of those around them. Understanding that when you feel tense when you're feeling upset, you can eventually learn that the people around you will also feel tense when they're upset. This way you're not only learning to recognize an emotion on somebody's face, but also in their body, and understand how they may be feeling in their body when they're feeling a certain emotion. Being able to identify how another person is feeling based on their body language or their facial expressions can assist a youth in forming relationships with caregivers and in finding friendships at school. I've included here a reproducible sheet from the Zones of Regulation manual that serves as a similar purpose of the ABC log covered in the last video. The basis of using this form is to record how different events during the day impact the youth's arousal, so everyone can see what their emotional triggers are. It's important to know what these triggers are, as well as what causes youth to feel lower arousal, so they can be addressed. Once we know these triggers and have identified what causes them, what are some of the strategies we can use to get back to feeling the perfect or just right amount of arousal? Well, many of these tools are very similar to the tools explored in our last video as part of our sensory toolbox, especially the deep pressure techniques. But before we get into that, let's look at some tools we can use for low arousal. If a youth is feeling low, we can encourage them to get up and do something. Be active, dance, play a game outside with friends, jump on the trampoline, jump around the house. We can encourage them to watch a funny video or a television show with us or with a sibling, maybe talking with their friends or playing a board game. Basically, when someone has low arousal, you want to get them involved in activities and get them thinking and doing. When a youth is experiencing higher arousal, they can be encouraged to ask for a break, take a few deep breaths to help them calm down, maybe listening to calm music or reading a book. This is also a great time to encourage the youth to use the deep pressure techniques covered in the last video. These techniques include chair push-ups, doing hand dots or arm squeezes, pushing down on the top of the head, pulling on the fingers, pressing your hands together as hard as you can, or doing some wall push-ups. These techniques give good proprioceptive feedback through the joints and muscles and really allow youth to focus in their brain and reduce that high arousal they may be feeling. Of course, once a youth is feeling so elevated that they're no longer afraid, that they're no longer in control of their emotions, or you're afraid they might be losing control of their emotions, it might be beneficial for you to offer strategies for them to do, and to do these strategies alongside them. You could offer them a bear hug, or other deep pressure strategies such as a weighted blanket. You could take some deep breaths alongside them. You could offer to give them a bit of space and allow them to have a bit of a time in. When they're beginning to feel overwhelmed, sometimes it's best not to crowd their bubble, just to give them a little bit of space and time to compose themselves. It's also important to make sure that the youth knows that they are safe. Sometimes a youth in the red zone, or who's feeling incredibly heightened emotions, may have difficulty controlling their own behaviors. While this can be frightening for us, it's often even more frightening for them. This is when the protective engagement strategies from the ideal approach come into play. This is what some of those strategies and approaches may look like. First, The most important thing to remember when helping a youth who is feeling or acting out of control is that it's your job to keep everyone safe. By reducing environmental dangers and by staying nearby if you're in a potentially dangerous environment. For example, you want to avoid the number of things that they can throw or hurt themselves with or hurt somebody else with. Sometimes even redirecting a youth to a less stimulating environment. This way you can, if you reduce the number of people in the room, you can prevent injury for others. You can also avoid further upsetting the youth who may already be feeling upset or threatened. When a youth is struggling with a big emotion or is feeling out of control, it's important not to send them away or punish them for their feelings. While it may seem like an obvious choice, a timeout is not the best approach when a youth is out of control. A time in is a lot better. While it's important not to crowd the youth, if you stay nearby in case they need something, they know that you're available and they know they're not alone. Speaking calmly to a youth who's out of control, but don't try to bargain with them or reason with them. At this point, the youth are not in an emotional or mental state to make good decisions or respond appropriately. Speak in a calm voice, explain that you're there for them if they need anything. Use emotion-based language to let them know that you can see they're having a difficult time with their emotions, but let them know that that's okay and you're not judging them for it. While you're spending time with them and you're speaking calmly, sometimes it's good to check in periodically and ask simple yes or no questions. Make your questions relevant to the situation at hand. Ask them something simple as if, like, are you feeling a little bit calmer? Or ask if they'd like you to help them calm down. These can be immensely beneficial questions. Once a youth is able to respond with actual words to these questions, that means they're beginning to regain a little bit of control, and we can move on to the next step. This final step can only be done once a youth is beginning to regain control, and this is to complete a calming strategy alongside the youth. These strategies, most often deep pressure or taking deep breaths, can help you both feel confident that they're back in control and they're not in danger of losing control again. So once again, a useful process of approaching out of control behaviors in youth are to keep everyone safe, not to isolate the youth. Speak calmly, but don't try to reason with them. Perform periodic check-ins using simple and relevant yes and no questions, and perform calming techniques alongside the youth when they begin to regain control of their emotions. Remember, it's all right if you feel overwhelmed, and it's important to keep a good base of support so that you don't become elevated in your own emotions. Make sure to ask for help and ask for service referrals if you feel like you need one, or you feel like you're in danger of not being able to cope with a youth's emotions or behaviors any longer. Some helpful resources are the free online tools found on the Zones of Regulation website, Generation Mindful Toolkit, which provides wonderful options for time-ins and emotional awareness, and, as always, if needed, a referral to mental health or occupational therapy services. Well, that concludes our final video in this training series. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that these tools and strategies help you find more understanding for the impact of past trauma on foster youth, and to feel more confident in using sensory and behavioral strategies for foster youth and youth in your care. Thank you so much for joining me.